I think so, yes. I would identify as Caribbean. Most of the time, people don't know where Aruba is located. And the first way I try to explain it is by saying that we're part of the region. When I think about myself, I do identify with a lot of things around in this region: music, food, language, history, family history. So I think overall I do identify with being Caribbean. I think it goes down to how I was raised, type of food I was raised eating, type of music I listen to, a lot of music from the region. A lot of the Aruban festivities, like Carnival, is influenced by the region. I would most likely identify with the Dutch more because of the history of the island with the Dutch. I am not connected to South America or Central American culture. Dutch was, I would say, 50% the first language I learned. At home, I am part of an interracial family, so I spoke Dutch with my mother and I spoke Papiamento with my father. When I was younger, the most frequent language was Dutch, but as I became older and I went to school, the Papiamento developed more than the Dutch. Yes, it is. Dutch is still the primary language within the educational system of Aruba. Papiamento has been a official language, if I'm not mistaken, in 2003. However, because of this, Aruba has introduced Papiamento as a language at school. As a matter of fact, the Minister of Education has announced that as of 2018, Papiamento or all schools will be multilingual, meaning that Papiamento will also be um, a official language within the school system, next to English, Spanish, and Dutch. I do believe that Dutch should be part of the educational system, seeing that most of us resort going to Holland for our higher education. Most students, after they finish high school, do leave the island and go to Holland to seek a higher education. Most students then follow a program, a bachelor program, for instance, in Dutch. So Dutch is really necessary. And again, seeing the history of Aruba with the entire Dutch kingdom, it is almost impossible to remove the Dutch. I love learning new languages. Languages has always been a strong point of mine since I was young. I know for a fact that in high schools, for instance, some students can choose another language such as French or German or Spanish next to their mandatory, mandatory languages, which are English, Dutch, and Papiamento. So now there is more of a diversification of languages. This is a hard question. This is almost impossible to answer because it depends with who I'm with or with in what environment I'm in. If I'm with my family from my mom's side, it's Dutch because I only speak Dutch with my mom's family. If it's the family of my dad's side, it's Papiamento because I only speak Papiamento with my dad's side of the family. If I'm at school, it's also a mix because usually Arubans cater to the language that you prefer speaking in. So if I meet you and you are a Spanish speaking person, I would resort to trying to speak Spanish with you, or I would just say, Papiamento is close enough. If you are coming from Europe, especially from Holland, we will just speak Dutch with you. If you come from Germany, I can't speak German that well, so I will just resort in English. So during my daily life, I speak more than two languages at least in a day. But I would have to say the most common language is Papiamento. But I think that has to do with the population. So the majority population in Aruba does prefer Papiamento because it's their native language. It's more comfortable. Thinking about Dutch, it's more about schoolwork. So when you're at home, you speak Papiamento. So your natural expressions is in your mother tongue. So that would be for the majority of the island, Papiamento. So I think being exposed to other languages, it is definitely, I'm exposed to my own language, Papiamento, but I am also exposed to Spanish. You see a lot of Spanish in social media. You see a lot of English, especially because Aruba is directed in at tourism. A lot of the ads or our social media is in English to cater to those who maybe don't understand Papiamento. Definitely. If you don't know Dutch, that won't be a problem because you can speak Spanish, you can speak Papiamento maybe, or you can learn Papiamento. A lot of people learn Papiamento because it's pretty, you can learn it pretty quick. I think there are benefits learning Dutch. One is you know an extra language, that's a plus. But I think if you are a student and you want to go abroad, especially if you want to go to Holland, it is important to know Dutch. Another thing, if you work in the on Aruba, whether it be with the government or not, a lot of all of our laws are in Dutch. So it is also a plus if you know Dutch because then you can understand policies of the government because a lot of that is in Dutch, and also you can understand the Aruban law, or if you need to read stuff coming from the government, it's mostly in Dutch. So having the knowledge of the Dutch language does help you with work, your future academic career if you're a student, and also just in general. Dutch, yes, at school. That's the only time that I have felt obligated. I went to a Dutch school when I was in the elementary years. All my teachers spoke Dutch to us as students, and we were obligated to respond back in Dutch. So we were not allowed to speak Papiamento. This is very mixed because some people say that Papiamento is our language, so we must be proud of it. A lot of the people are very proud of the language, so they want to keep the awareness there that we have to promote the language more. Others don't have much of an opinion because they were raised with more than one language in their household. So for them, it is not necessarily important to keep pursuing or keep the Papiamento language alive. There, I have to say, there are more and more. Um, the initiative is there more and more to keep the language alive. So, but it is not from the entire island. It is more from the specific group of people who live on the island who feel most connected to the language. Because you have to understand that on Aruba resides more than 90 different nationalities. So some people are not born on the island, and for them, Papiamento is not really important. So the importance of the language lies more to the people who were born here or were raised within the Aruban culture. I don't think Dutch is more important than Papiamento. I think they're equal because they're both languages. They're both official languages. What I do have an opinion of is that Dutch does give you more opportunities abroad. And I say this only for students because I'm a student as well. So dominating the Dutch language does give me more opportunities working on Aruba, especially if you're going to work for the government or you're going to work for the public sector or private sector. Dutch is a benefit. I don't think Papiamento will disappear. Papiamento is not only spoken on Aruba. Papiamento is spoken on Curacao, St. Martin, Bonaire. In the Netherlands, we have a lot of Arubans and people from Curacao and Bonaire residing in the Netherlands. We have people living in international places, the United States of America or Latin America. I have friends in Australia that speak Papiamento because they're native Arubans. So I don't think the language will ever disappear. What I do believe that the language will evolve with different influences from the outside or influences from other languages, which has been the case since the beginning because the Papiamento language is a mixture of different languages. And it reflects also the history of the island. So the influences of the different colonies, definitely. And I can speak for myself. We do have different variations of the language, and we do have our own phrases and our own slang within the language. So I think that if the evolution of the language will continue within this generation and the generations to come. And now, especially with the use of social media, and I think that will not decrease, but it will actually increase. The difference is immense. We have two different types of papiamento. Papiamento, the Aruban papiamento, or actually we can call it, there are three different styles of papiamento. The first one is the Aruban one, the second one is one from Curacao, the third one is one from Bonaire. The differences between the languages, or the difference between the styles of the same language, is based on writing and pronunciation. You have a difference in papiamento etimológico, which means the writing, and papiamento fonológico, which is how it's pronounced or how you hear the language. Aruba has a unique grammar and vocabulary compared to Curacao or Bonaire, because in Curacao, the written papiamento is the same way as they hear it. So, for example, in Curacao, you read the newspaper, it is not written the same way. The grammar or the vocabulary, the words are not written the same way as you read in a Aruban newspaper. For example, I'm just going to give simple explanation. We're going to use the word stool, which means chair in Papiamento. Stoel is a borrowed word from the Dutch language, stoel. In the Aruban Papiamento, or the Aruban version of the Papiamento, we take the word as is and we adopt it in our language, or in our writing. So if the Dutch language writes stoel, S-T-O-E-L, in Papiamento, the Aruban way, we also use the same pronunciation and the same grammar rules, or the same way to write it. In Curacao, this is not the case. They use the word stool as well. They might pronunciate the word stool just like we do, but they don't write it the same. Instead, they write it S-T-U-L, because the U and the O-E has the same sound. But in the Papiamento rules of Aruba, the Aruban Papiamento rules, you adopt the word. So you write it the way that it is written in the other language, the language that you borrowed or you adopted the word from. So in Curacao, the expressions are also different. Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire might have the same language, but they have a kind of a different experience with the language. Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire also have a different history. So you feel the culture very differently within the three languages. It is the same language. It is just three different forms of the language. I think so. In my opinion, it depends on the group, the ethnic group that is speaking Papiamento. The Dutch who live on Aruba might have a different adaptation to Papiamento, because they would use, for instance, Dutch words or slang and just use it in the Papiamento version. You have also the Spanish community who reside on the island. They also have their own mixture of Spanish and Papiamento. You have the same thing with Chinese and Papiamento. So I do definitely think that dialects within the language exist. My personal opinion, I am grateful. This means that we have a Dutch nationality, we have a Dutch passport, so we're European. Aruba's history with the colonization of Aruba through the Spaniards, through the English, and the Dutch. Ultimately, the Dutch were the last group who colonized the island. So the Dutch culture, the Dutch relationship with Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire, and St. Martin, St. Eustatius, and Saba. I think it is important to mention that Aruba does have its partial independence through a status aparte. In 1986, we received this. So we are independent country, but we still reside within the kingdom. And I think this is a nice balance because you cannot remove the history of the island with the Dutch, but I think it is a good compromise to still have our own independence. Yes, it is. It started when the Parliament of officially made Papiamento an official language on the island. The parliament meetings are both in Papiamento and in Dutch. I think the government also works with the Papiamento language during, I would say, in the midst of the departments and stuff like that. So I do think they are trying to create a healthy balance between the Papiamento language and the Dutch language. And I think this could only bring positive things. They are done in both. When referring to articles, when it has to do with the law or policies, they talk in Dutch. Letters are all in Dutch. But there are some government departments who use Papiamento as their official language.